Welcome, everyone, to Speak and Feel English, the podcast where we help you communicate naturally, confidently, and professionally in English. I am Mia, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Ethan. Today, we are beginning an in-depth discussion on one of the most flexible and useful modal verbs in English, could. This word appears simple, but it carries a surprising range of meanings depending on context, tone, and structure.
That is absolutely right, Mia. Many learners assume that could is only the past tense of can, but in real conversation, it performs far more functions. It can describe past ability, polite requests, possibilities, suggestions, and even hypothetical situations. Understanding how to use could correctly can instantly make someone sound more fluent and socially aware.
Let us begin with the most straightforward usage, which is could as the past form of can to describe general ability in the past. For example, if I say, "When I was a child, I could swim for hours," I am describing an ability that existed in the past. The emphasis here is on something that was possible or achievable at that time.
Exactly, and it is important to note that when we talk about general past abilities, could works very well. However, if we refer to a specific successful action in the past, English often prefers was able to instead. For instance, I was able to finish the project before midnight sounds more natural than I could finish the project before midnight, because we are referring to one particular completed event.
That distinction is subtle but extremely important. Learners often assume that could and was able to are interchangeable, but context determines which one sounds more natural. Could is broader and describes capability, while was able to emphasizes the successful completion of a task.
Another important function of could is expressing polite requests. In professional or social settings, using could instead of can often softens the tone. If I say, "Could you send me the report by tomorrow?" it sounds more respectful and less direct than, "Can you send me the report by tomorrow?"
Yes, and that is because could introduces a sense of consideration and indirectness. It suggests that the speaker acknowledges the listener's autonomy. This is especially useful in workplaces, academic environments, or any conversation where courtesy matters.
I often tell learners that switching from can to could in requests is one of the fastest ways to sound more professional. For example, "Could we schedule a meeting next week?" sounds collaborative and thoughtful, while "Can we schedule a meeting next week?" sounds more casual.
That brings us to another function of could, expressing possibility. When we use could in this sense, we are talking about something that might happen but is not certain. For instance, the results could improve if we adjust the strategy. Here, we are suggesting a potential outcome rather than a guaranteed one.
And in conversations about planning or forecasting, this usage appears frequently. If someone says, "This investment could grow over time," they're presenting an optimistic possibility while acknowledging uncertainty.
What I find interesting is that tone changes meaning. When spoken confidently, could sounds optimistic. When spoken cautiously, it may signal doubt. So pronunciation and context play a role just as much as grammar.
That is an excellent observation. Modal verbs like could are not just grammatical tools, they're social signals. They show politeness, uncertainty, imagination, or reflection. This is why mastering them helps learners move from textbook English into real communication.
Could becomes especially powerful in hypothetical and imagined situations. This is where English speakers use it to discuss things that are not real yet, but are possible under certain conditions.
Absolutely. One of the most common structures is using could in conditional sentences. For example, if I say, "If we invested more time in research, we could improve the final outcome," I am describing a result that is not guaranteed but possible if the condition is met.
The word could here expresses potential rather than certainty.
That is a perfect example. Conditional sentences often follow the pattern if plus past form, followed by could plus base verb. This structure helps speakers discuss strategies, solutions, or opportunities without sounding overly confident or unrealistic.
And it also allows room for collaboration. When someone says, we could explore alternative options, it invites discussion rather than imposing a decision. In professional communication, this makes the speaker sound thoughtful and open-minded.
That collaborative tone is exactly why could appears so frequently in meetings and brainstorming sessions. Instead of saying, we must change the plan, a manager might say, we could adjust the timeline, which sounds more diplomatic and encourages participation.
Another important function is using could to make suggestions. When we use could in this way, we are presenting an idea gently rather than forcefully. For example, you could try approaching the client with a revised proposal. This sounds supportive rather than directive.
Yes, and suggestions with could are especially useful in mentoring or advisory roles. Teachers, supervisors, and consultants often prefer this structure because it shows respect for the listener's independence.
It is interesting how the same modal verb can shift from describing ability to expressing strategy. Context is everything. When I say, I could run 5 miles last year, I am talking about ability. But when I say, we could run a pilot program first, I am offering a proposal.
That flexibility is what makes modal verbs essential to natural speech. Another nuanced use of could is expressing mild criticism or missed opportunities. For example, if I say, you could have informed me earlier, it suggests disappointment without sounding harsh.
That structure, could have plus past participle, is very important. It refers to something that was possible in the past but did not happen. It often implies that a different choice might have led to a better outcome.
Exactly. For instance, we could have avoided delays if we had prepared sooner. This sentence reflects on the past and gently evaluates what might have been done differently.
This usage is extremely common in reflective discussions, performance reviews, or project analysis. It allows speakers to evaluate situations without directly blaming anyone.
Let us also touch on the emotional tone of could. Compared to stronger modal verbs like must or should, could sounds less rigid. It leaves room for interpretation and personal judgment.
That softer tone is why it appears frequently in diplomatic language. When leaders, managers, or negotiators speak, they often prefer could because it signals openness rather than authority.
I agree. Even in everyday conversation, people instinctively use could to maintain harmony. Instead of saying, you should change this, someone might say, you could consider changing this, which feels more respectful.
Let us give listeners a few examples they can use immediately. In a workplace context, someone might say, we could review the data once more before finalizing the report. In a social situation, one might say, we could meet for coffee next week. And in a reflective discussion, someone might say, I could have handled that conversation more carefully.
Those examples highlight how could functions across different contexts while maintaining a consistent sense of possibility and openness. It's never overly forceful, yet it remains clear and purposeful. Let us focus on how could works in indirect speech, because this is an area where many learners hesitate. Indirect speech often requires shifting verb forms to reflect reported meaning, and could appears frequently in these situations.
That is true. For instance, if someone originally says, I can finish this today, and later you report it, you might say, she said she could finish it that day. Here, could functions as the reported form of can, and it helps maintain grammatical consistency when describing past conversations.
Exactly. And this shift is not just grammatical, it also reflects perspective. When we report what someone said earlier, we often move one step back in time linguistically, and could helps us do that smoothly.
Another interesting aspect is how could appears in formal communication, especially in emails or presentations. Instead of writing, we can provide additional data, professionals often write, we could provide additional data upon request. That phrasing sounds more refined and less presumptive.
Yes, and that difference is subtle but powerful. Can sounds confident and immediate, while could sounds considerate and flexible. In professional environments, that distinction helps maintain a cooperative tone.
I have also noticed that could is commonly used when discussing long-term strategies. For example, a project leader might say, this initiative could strengthen our market position over time. The use of could shows optimism without overstating certainty.
That balance between confidence and realism is one of the main reasons fluent speakers rely on modal verbs. They allow us to express ideas with precision while still leaving room for interpretation.
Let us also consider could in questions, because this is another area where tone matters greatly. If I ask, could you explain that process again? The question sounds patient and respectful. Compare that to, can you explain that process again, which may sound slightly more direct.
Exactly. And in academic or professional discussions, that softer tone often improves cooperation. People respond more positively when they feel respected rather than commanded.
I have also noticed that could is commonly used when discussing long-term strategies. For instance, a project leader might say, this initiative could strengthen our market position over time. The use of could shows optimism without overstating certainty.
That balance between confidence and realism is one of the main reasons fluent speakers rely on modal verbs. They allow us to express ideas with precision while still leaving room for interpretation.
Let us also consider could in questions, because this is another area where tone matters greatly. If I ask, could you explain that process again? The question sounds patient and respectful. Compare that to, can you explain that process again, which may sound slightly more direct.
Exactly. And in academic or professional discussions, that softer tone often improves cooperation. People respond more positively when they feel respected rather than commanded.
Another advanced usage appears when could expresses uncertainty about past events. For instance, the error could have occurred during data transfer. This suggests a possible explanation without making a definite claim.
That structure is extremely useful in analytical writing, research discussions, or problem-solving meetings. It allows speakers to present theories while acknowledging that further evidence may be needed.
And it also prevents premature conclusions. Instead of saying the error happened during data transfer, which sounds definitive, could have occurred keeps the statement open to revision.
Let us talk about pronunciation briefly, because modal verbs often lose their clarity when spoken too quickly. In natural speech, could is sometimes reduced in sound, especially in questions like, could you help me? If learners are unaware of this, they might not recognize the word in conversation.
That is a great point. Listening practice is essential. Native speakers often pronounce it softly, almost like could, which can be difficult to catch at first. However, once learners expect it, comprehension improves rapidly.
Another conversational pattern involves combining could with adverbs to refine meaning. For example, we could possibly extend the deadline, or this approach could significantly reduce costs. These combinations make speech more precise and professional.
Yes, and they allow speakers to adjust intensity, saying could slightly improve versus could dramatically improve changes the impact of the statement while maintaining the same grammatical structure.
Let us offer a few natural sentences listeners can practice. Someone in a meeting might say, "Could we revisit this topic after reviewing the data?" A team member might say, "This adjustment could increase efficiency." And in a reflective discussion, one might say, "The misunderstanding could have been avoided with clearer instructions."
Those examples demonstrate how could supports diplomacy, analysis, and collaboration all at once. It's not simply a grammar feature, it's a communication strategy.
Let us now focus on how could interacts with tone and personality, because this is where language becomes more than structure and turns into expression. The same sentence can sound encouraging, doubtful, imaginative, or cautious, depending on how could is used.
That is a crucial insight. For example, if a manager says, "You could take the lead on this project," the sentence may function as encouragement, suggesting trust in the employee's abilities. But if spoken with hesitation, it might sound like uncertainty about who should lead.
Exactly. And this shows how modal verbs carry emotional signals. They're not only grammatical markers, but also indicators of attitude. Speakers who use could effectively often sound more thoughtful and considerate.
Another important aspect is how could supports imaginative thinking. When brainstorming ideas, people rarely speak in certainties. Instead, they say things like, "We could develop a new feature," or "This concept could attract a broader audience." These statements invite creativity rather than demand immediate action.
That is why innovation discussions rely heavily on modal verbs. They create a safe linguistic space where ideas can exist without being judged too quickly. By using could, speakers signal that they are exploring possibilities rather than enforcing conclusions.
Let us also consider how could works in storytelling or personal reflection. Someone might say, "At that moment, I realized how much this experience could change my perspective." Here, could expresses emotional or psychological possibility rather than physical capability.
Yes, and in narratives, it often highlights turning points. It allows the speaker to express awareness of potential outcomes without claiming certainty. This makes the storytelling sound more reflective and nuanced.
Another conversational function appears when could softens disagreement. Suppose two colleagues are discussing a proposal. One might say, "I see your point, but we could consider an alternative approach." This phrasing maintains respect while still presenting a different opinion.
That is an excellent example of diplomatic language. Instead of rejecting an idea directly, the speaker uses could to introduce another option. This keeps the discussion constructive and collaborative.
Similarly, in negotiations or decision-making, people often rely on could to maintain flexibility. Saying, "We could adjust the terms if necessary," shows willingness to cooperate without making immediate commitments.
And that flexibility is essential in professional communication. It signals openness while preserving boundaries. Modal verbs help speakers navigate that balance gracefully.
Let us also address how could functions in personal advice. If a friend says, "You could start by organizing your schedule," the advice feels supportive rather than commanding. Compare that with "start by organizing your schedule," which sounds more like an instruction.
Yes, and this distinction matters because people respond better to suggestions than orders in most situations. Using could demonstrates empathy and respect for autonomy.
We should also mention that could can express gentle optimism. When someone says, "This opportunity could lead to something meaningful," they are expressing hope without exaggeration.
That balance between hope and realism makes language sound mature and thoughtful. Fluent speakers often choose modal verbs carefully because they understand how much tone shapes interpretation.
Let us give listeners a few sentences they can practice to internalize this idea. In a brainstorming session, one might say, "We could expand this concept into a full campaign." In a supportive conversation, someone might say, "You could take some time to reflect before deciding." And in a negotiation, one might say, "We could revisit this agreement in a few months."
Those examples show how could allow speakers to remain constructive, collaborative, and forward-looking. It keeps conversations open rather than closing them with rigid statements. As we reach the final part of our discussion, let us bring together everything we have explored about the modal verb could. Throughout this conversation, we have seen that this small word carries remarkable expressive power. It allows speakers to describe past ability, present possibilities, polite requests, hypothetical outcomes, suggestions, reflections, and even emotional nuance.
That summary captures it perfectly. What makes could especially valuable is that it helps speakers sound thoughtful rather than rigid. In real communication, sounding cooperative and open often matters just as much as grammatical accuracy.
Exactly. When learners first study English, they tend to focus on whether a sentence is correct or incorrect. But fluent communication depends on something deeper, choosing the form that best reflects intention, tone, and relationship. Could give speakers that flexibility.
One practical strategy for listeners is to begin noticing how frequently could appears in professional conversations. In meetings, presentations, and discussions, speakers rarely rely on absolute statements. Instead, they say things like, "We could review this again," or "This solution could work well in the long term." These phrases maintain confidence while still inviting dialogue.
That invitation to dialogue is essential. Language is not only about conveying information, it is also about shaping interaction. When someone uses could, they signal that they are open to collaboration, which encourages others to participate.
Another useful approach is to practice replacing stronger statements with modal constructions. For example, instead of saying, "This plan will succeed," try saying, "This plan could succeed with the right support." The second version sounds more realistic and persuasive because it acknowledges conditions.
Yes, and that realism builds credibility. People tend to trust speakers who express ideas with balance rather than certainty. Modal verbs like could help create that balance.
Let us also remind listeners that fluency develops through repetition. The more often they incorporate could into everyday speech, the more natural it will feel. They might begin with simple sentences such as, "I could try that approach," or "We could discuss this later," and gradually expand into more complex structures.
Listening practice is equally important. When you hear fluent speakers using could, notice the context and tone. Ask yourself why they chose that form instead of a stronger one. This awareness gradually strengthens your own instincts.
Another effective method is reflection. At the end of each day, think about conversations you had and consider how could might have changed the tone. For example, if you gave direct advice, ask yourself whether framing it as a suggestion with could would have sounded more supportive.
That reflective habit transforms grammar into a communication skill. It shifts the focus from memorizing rules to understanding impact.
Ultimately, mastering could is not about complexity. It is about sensitivity. It shows that the speaker recognizes uncertainty, respects the listener, and values cooperation. These qualities define strong communicators in any environment.
I completely agree. And the beauty of modal verbs is that once you become comfortable with one, it becomes easier to understand others. They all contribute to making language more human and adaptable.
Before we close, let us leave listeners with a few final example sentences they can practice. Someone in a workplace might say, "We could revisit the proposal after gathering feedback." A student might say, "I could spend more time reviewing the material this week." And in personal reflection, one might say, "That experience could influence my future decisions." Those sentences show how naturally could fits into everyday life. It is not a rare or advanced structure. It is a practical tool for clearer and more considerate communication. That brings us to the end of today's episode. We hope this conversation has helped you see how one word can transform the way you express ideas, possibilities, and relationships in English.
Thank you for listening to Speak and Feel English. If you found this discussion helpful, be sure to follow the channel, subscribe for more episodes, and explore all the podcasts available so you can continue improving your fluency and confidence in English communication.
We look forward to continuing this journey with you in the next episode.
Until then, keep practicing, keep expressing, and keep speaking with clarity and confidence.